Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? There's a ton of off-season football news. We're going to unpack it all right here. It's episode 397 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. Coming at you on a rainy Wednesday morning here, December 11th, 2024, from our high-tech studio at the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content, and as always, for students, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. Today's TSL podcast is also brought to you by The Hokie Way, which has launched their annual year-end Stone by Stone campaign to support Virginia Tech NIL and local nonprofits. Last year's campaign raised over $700,000 and helped bring in talent like Aeneas Peebles from the transfer portal. This is a critical fundraising campaign for many reasons, so visit thehokieway.org to learn more and to donate. And we'll drop the link in the video description down below as well. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, David Cunningham, our managing editor. Across the way, Andy Bitter, our senior staff writer. In the fourth chair, my co-groomsman in Nick Brown's wedding. That's Mr. Carter Hill, and then Nick Brown, the mustache man, pushing the buttons behind the scenes. No Chris today. No Chris. So
is he in the portal? What happened to Chris? It'd be a fad. That's what's going on.
Very true. We all have
At least he redshirted before.
That's true. That's true. We have braved the elements to get here today. It's not fun out there. And we have a bowl destination. I think we all, in a way, got what we wanted. We're heading to the Duke's Mayo Bowl down in Charlotte, January 3rd. Fellas, we are going to get into that later on in today's show. But let's lead off with the transfer portal. We'll read off the names of those that have entered and then have some questions to follow. Xavier Turner Bradshaw's in the portal. Jonathan Penix, Jordan Tapscott, Braylon Moore, Gunnar Givens, Malachi Thomas, Mose Phillips, Jackson Sigler, Marcel Baylor, Griffin Dugan, Xavier Chaplin, Jalen Stroman, Kelly Lawson, Lance Williams, Curtis Perry, Ishmael Findlater, and Malachi Madsen. Those are the Hokies that have entered the portal. What is the biggest loss here and why? We'll start with Andy.
Xavier Chaplin. Both figuratively and literally the biggest loss in the portal here. I mean, they got 13 guys. Half of them are sort of roster churn. You're going to get that typically. A couple of them are situations where you look at it and you go, maybe looking for more playing time or more defined role. And then a couple of them are sort of head scratchers or guys that you go, man, how do you lose that guy? Xavier Chaplin is one of them. He's a 2-year starting left tackle. When you have starting left tackles on your roster, you compensate them. Those are, premier positions. This is why NFL left tackles get all the big contracts, is because they're protecting your quarterback's blind side. You need to get that position locked down. So I would imagine he's in for a pretty good payday in the portal. Any kind of even mediocre offensive lineman goes in the portal, and there's sort of a feeding frenzy over that guy. So I could imagine one of Chaplin's caliber, who I think he's an all ACC caliber guy. I know he wasn't on one of the first 3 teams this year, but he was an honorable mention type. With the experience that he has, with the potential that he has, with the size that he has, I think he's going to be a commodity out there that a lot of schools are going after, and he'll probably get a decent paycheck. And it's a blow to this offensive line. I think Braylon Moore, the other one on the offensive line, but a returning guy who's got a brother in the program who's graduating, but still has been here over the years. I think you look at those two, the combination of those two on the offensive line, and then you're losing Clements, you're losing Caden Moore to graduation. It's going to be a complete overhaul of that group going forward.
Andy talked about the offensive line. I'll talk about the safeties. I think that's the other big one. Mose Phillips, he's a second-year guy, and he's entering the portal. Jalen Stroman as well. Stroman started in that Vanderbilt game, got hurt, collarbone injury, hadn't played since. And even last year, he was a little nicked up, dealing with injuries. and he couldn't stay on the field between that and targeting. So that's two big safeties. You're losing Jalen Jones as well. You return Quentin Reddish, and that's it in that room. So a big overhaul in the safety room as well. I think the Phillips one is a little bit interesting because this is a guy who I think slightly improved over the last 2 years, especially from, I think, year 1 to year 2. But he's got his entire career in front of him, basically. And now he's leaving, and you basically have to kind of overhaul or start with a young guy in Quentin Reddish there. So between that and the offensive line room, I think that's the tough part. Gio, you mentioned some of the other guys, 2 corners, Penix and Xavier Turner-Bradshaw, who moved there from wide receiver this offseason. There are a couple guys on the defensive line, all guys that were kind of depth pieces, more or less. I think where it really hurts is at safety and offensive line. Malachi Thomas one, I don't think is very surprising, but it leaves Tech's running back room with just three guys. You are already going to have to get guys there. Now you're going to have to get more. And then the other guy is Kelly Lawson, and he's a guy who's been in the program for a really long time. And I think he was kind of stuck at will for a while, and then they moved him to star for like the Duke game, and he played pretty well.
I thought that if they had him at star as like the starting star next year, because you're not going to have Gabe Williams, a pretty serious leg injury late in the season, and Caleb Spencer had his moments. Every time he did something, you'd hear Price say, "Well, he's got to learn how to play within the system," which is just a way of saying, freelance less when you're out there, and that kind of drives coaches nuts sometimes. Even if those guys are making plays, at times they want them to be, do what they're assigned to do within the defensive scheme. I thought Lawson looked pretty good there in that cameo against Duke, and then against UVA playing at that position. That could have been a spot for him, and I feel like that's, I don't know, isn't that where you want a 6'6", 220-pound guy is out there in the open space and just let his limbs just eat up space and passing lanes and stuff like that? It always felt like a misfit for him on the inside, and too bad Chris is not here, because this would set him off on a rant for 5 minutes about linebackers and where they should play. But it felt like a missed opportunity with him, because he felt like he had a lot of potential, just never quite tapped into. I mean, he was their leading tackler a couple years ago.
Yeah.
There was a chance there. It just always felt like a misfit on the inside.
I want to incorporate Carter into this conversation, because with this not being neither a preview or a post-game podcast, the fourth chair role is a little bit decreased here. Carter, any surprises for you as far as names entering the portal goes? Are we kind of at that point where now we're, 3 years into this thing, nothing really surprises you anymore?
That's what I was going to say. I don't know if you can really be surprised by anything anymore. To David's point, though, Mose Phillips is the one that kind of raises your eyebrows a little bit, maybe. Xavier Chaplin's a guy that, to Andy's point, he could maybe go elsewhere and get a little bit more. Where I'm really intrigued is, again, you guys talked about it last week with the quarterback situation. Ideally, you have Kyron Drones and Pop Watson come back next year. But what is the likelihood of that happening? Obviously, we'll see what happens going forward in that area, but that's the biggest thing that stands out to me. And also on the flip side of things, again, most of these guys are leaving because of playing time, but I'm concerned about the offensive line going forward because, as you guys know, offensive linemen are tough to find in the transfer portal. Well, now you're losing quite a bit of guys. You're losing, 4 starters now there? Is that correct? 4 starters?
Yep.
So how are you going to replace all that production? And by the way, you only have 8 scholarship guys available for the bowl game right now. That's a little bit of a lower priority, but is Virginia Tech even going to have the bodies up front down in Charlotte? That's a whole different discussion as well. So those are things that kind of come to mind.
I think, you normally get this number of transfers every year. I feel like 13 scholarship guys in the portal right now. That's not that unusual of a number. You look around the country and there are a lot of schools that have it. I think what is concerning about this team is that there are so many guys that are leaving due to graduation to begin with. I mean, just go through the depth chart and how many guys are coming back next year or have not announced anything yet. On offense, Bob Schick is coming back. I've been told that he's coming back for a 12th year in college, apparently. I mean, he had the Mormon mission and then junior college. So, he's obviously on the older side there. Benji Gosnell at tight end. And then the only other one we don't know about on offense is Kyron Drones, who, let's face it, are two quarterbacks going to come back if they're not both, given a role or a starting role? It's tough to sort of navigate that whole situation. Then you get on the defensive side, Caleb Woodson and Jaden Keller at linebacker, and then who else? Mansour Delane? I feel like he might be off to the NFL at this point. So,
sure.
You're talking about just perhaps a complete overall of this depth chart. And, this team was 6-6 here. I'm not talking like they're dismantling this, college football playoff caliber team, but you like to have the continuity. You like to have at least some returning guys. And, that didn't quite work out last year, but there were maybe other reasons why they didn't achieve their goals last season other than the guys that came back. So I just think there's a general unease in Hokie Nation right now because they go, well, a bunch of starters are leaving because of graduation. Now, a few more starters that were supposed to be key pieces next year are now in the transfer portal. Who are you going to lean on? Is there enough depth coming up the ranks to fill those spots? And are they going to do well enough in the transfer portal to plug all these spots? And, that's a pretty big question that's out there hanging for everybody to answer.
And to Andy's point, I think Virginia Tech has done well overall in the transfer portal in the past. Where Tech has struggled is on the offensive line. And that's back-to-back years. Tech has brought in an offensive line in the portal. First Clayton Frady, then Montavious Cunningham, and they have not panned out. And you're looking at this going, you have to completely overhaul your offensive line now. That is the most concerning position for me. I think you can find, like they found Derek Canteen 2 years ago, and he came in and he was a pretty serviceable, pretty solid defensive back there. Sam Brumfield, I think, was okay at Mike. So I think there are some of these spots where obviously on the defensive line, Tech found some guys who were really, really successful. Aeneas Peebles. But to have to do that over your entire roster, I think a lot of Virginia Tech fans are looking at this saying, okay, we returned 18 to 22 starters, 18 to 20 of the 22 starters last year and only won 6 games. And now we're returning between 4 and 6. It's an even bigger uphill climb this year, and I think it's a little concerning in some areas.
One more returning guy on defense, Kelvin Gilliam at defensive tackle. He started in that UVA game. Him and Panay kind of went back and forth all year on who was in that spot, but still not a ton of guys coming back. Maybe the quarterback though, Pop Watson. Who knows exactly what that designation is?
It seems like it's going to start with the offensive line, but how much does this number of guys leaping in the portal impact what this team now has to do as far as reeling guys out of the portal to fill those holes a little bit here? Like they almost have to work on the fly here. Does it change any of their philosophies where they're going to attack? We knew they were going to go try and get a running back. Now do they have to go try and get an extra safety because of this extra O lineman? Where do you see that?
Well, there are spots they have to fill now. You have to get some offensive linemen. You have to get a running back. You have to get a safety. And then there are other spots that you'd like to fill. You'd like to get a veteran receiver. I don't think you need one necessarily. It'd be a really young group if you don't have it, and it'd be nice to have that guy, but that would sort of be a luxury at this point. Offensive line-wise, I don't know how you get through the season if you only have 11 scholarship guys. So you need to add 2, maybe 3 bodies there just to come in and compete, whether or not those guys become starters or not. Safety, what do you have at safety right now? Quentin Reddish is the only guy coming back that's really been on the field. He's a true freshman this year. So you're talking about major inexperience in those spots. Cornerback, I think if Dorian Strong's going to the NFL, he's already told us that. I think Mansour Delane has a chance to go to the NFL here and probably will. That's pretty young at those cornerback spots. I think they like Lovett, they like Thomas Williams, but those guys have been backups and haven't played a whole lot. Beyond that, Joshua Clark, Penix just went into the transfer portal now. Christian Williams has been hurt basically the entire time he's been here. So I think you need to fill these spots, and it's just, when you're plugging, like last year, you're like, they got Aeneas Peebles. They plugged the defensive tackle hole there. Kelvin Gilliam. They had specific needs that they went in. They were very targeted, and they got those guys. It feels like there's a need at every single position right now, and that's tougher to do. You have to cast a really wide net and just a lot more moving parts and trying to put this roster together. And who knows exactly how they can allocate this NIL budget that they have. There's going to be it's not a limit, but there's an amount of money that they have that they can spend, and they've got to figure out how to spend that. And I think that's one of the challenges right now.
Yeah, you have to budget it all right. What are the chances Virginia Tech is able to, whether that has to do with NIL or not, and you'd have to think it does a little bit, reel some of these guys back in? Someone like a Braylon Moore, for example, that you can match what they're looking for, or maybe the grass is not greener as far as opportunities that they may be expected when putting their name into the portal, and you can kind of bring them back in.
Yeah, that might be a tough one to do, but I think if you're a coach, maybe you just have to swallow your pride on some of this. If it can work out and you guys can hash that out, and hey, they're back in the fold. Like if Xavier Chaplin came back to them and it's like, you know what, I think I can make it work here if you give me this, and Virginia Tech is acceptable of that number, I think they go, hell yes, absolutely. Yeah. Get out to practice right now. We'll plug you in there. And I mean, you can be principled and be like, once people go in the portal, they're done with the team. We're not even dealing with them anymore. But if you do that, you can lose a lot of your roster that's trying to go in there and try to sense what their market value is. So, technically you can't do that until you go into the portal, or that's not how it's supposed to work. Is you're supposed to go in and then people offer you and talk to you about stuff. But we know how it works. There's intermediaries, there's back channels that people can kind of find out a little bit. So the whole thing's a mess right now. I'll say that until there's some sort of contract structure with players. It's going to have, the schools have to give a little bit and actually admit these guys are employees before you can ever get to that point. So I'm not arguing on behalf of the schools here and saying woe is them for not having these firm contracts to keep guys in place. But until they get to that point, you're going to have this situation where guys are going to go out there and test their market value, and there's a lot of money out there to be made. And honestly, I don't blame them for going and trying to get it.
The interesting thing here, Gio, you ask about, can Virginia Tech convince guys back? I think Chaplin and Moore, those are the two guys I'd seriously want back. Those are the two guys. It's like, man, I'd do everything I can until they commit somewhere else to get them back. But I think if you're a Virginia Tech fan, what might be a little concerning is you look across the board, and there are a lot of these guys on this list that either had big roles this year or we're going to have big roles next year, and they're leaving. And so you're probably asking yourself why. But you talked about, just in terms of just filling stuff. You're, like Andy said, your priorities are a little bit different now, I think. Before, if Braylon Moore and Xavier Chaplin didn't leave, you would have those two guys and Bob Schick back. So you'd only have to replace Caden Moore at center and Parker Clements at right tackle. Now you only have a right guard in Bob Schick. Like, that's a big difference, having 3 offensive linemen instead of having 1. The running back stuff, like, obviously you already had to replace Bashal Tootin. Now you have to go get probably a second guy. So it's like, and one thing I texted Chris about yesterday, it is very interesting. If you look, I believe, at the last 3 running backs Virginia Tech has gotten out of the transfer portal, Bashal Tootin, Raheem Blackshear, and Khalil Herbert.
Pretty good run.
I mean, that's basically batting 1,000, I think. So, I think
that means they're bound to swing and miss, David.
Well, that's why you bring in 2 and you hope one of them hits. I think this staff has done a really, really good job in getting the right guys in. I mean, you see a guy like Aeneas Peoples come in, he's a first-team All-ACC pick, right? Now, again, that's not necessarily the guy I think you developed here, but they were able to go out and get the right fit. But it's one thing, like Andy said, when you're, I think, having to do it where it's like, oh man, we got to go out and get one guy here. It's another thing when it's like you're trying to cover all the holes at once. So I'm very interested to see how it goes and what kind of young guys we might have to see step up in some areas if the depth does not get as covered as Tech might want it to be.
I think it's an easier sell sometimes when you can go to somebody like Aeneas Peoples and be like, hey, you're the missing piece on this defensive line. Like, they can see the other pieces in place in this defense and go, hey, we need you to play this spot. And if you do that, we can be a great defense. Now, they didn't quite get there, but that was the pitch last year. Was you're going to be perfect for this defense and you can come in and do it. When he was
a first teamer.
Right, and it worked out well. When you're going, hey, we need you to come into this team and then we're going to add this guy and this guy and this guy and this guy. Can you envision what it's like? I think it's a harder sell for guys coming in. Now, maybe you offer them enough money and it's like, okay, then I can see that vision pretty clearly if I do that. The other thing I think that we can take out of this, and we're talking about, will Brent Pry make staff changes and stuff like this? I feel like this is kind of a vote from the players showing what they feel about some of these coaches. I mean, the fact that all your starting offensive linemen are leaving is not a great sign for the development that they've had on the offensive line, and Ron Crook in that situation. I think the fact that Jalen Stroman, Mose Phillips, all these safeties that could come back, it's not a great sign. Pearson Prelu in the secondary. I mean, you have to look at this and go, what kind of voice can these players have in saying whether or not they like the situation they're in? And if entire rooms are just leaving, I think that does not reflect well on the position coaches in that spot. So, we'll see. I have my computer up here because who knows when any of this news could happen during the week. If they're going to make coaching changes, I think if you're Brent Pry, you have to take that into consideration and go, well, what shape is your position room in right now? And if it's decimated by these departures, that's got to factor into your decision, I think.
I think that's a really good point, Andy, that I hadn't quite thought of. To bring Carter and David back into this conversation, and of course Andy as well, what do we know about maybe some of the guys that Tech has offered or are looking to get out of the portal? Is there anything we can share? Obviously, I don't think they have a single portal commitment yet, but they have tossed some offers out there.
I'll say this for Nick and for Chris. There's some great names in the portal. We have, and I'm saying this because I think it was Nick sent a Slack message about this earlier. There's General Booty, there's Matthew McDoom, and Fluff Bothwell. I mean, those are like three elite names. That's like, I can just imagine Chris just like drooling over saying those names 1,000 times on the podcast. I think the tough part here is we're 2 days into the portal and it's very early, right? There are still some guys, for example, even on Tech's own team. We don't know what Kyron Jones is doing yet, right? I think there are still some guys that are maybe around the country that are not necessarily in the portal yet. Tech has offered like 15, 20 guys, casting a wide net. And I think some of these guys, seen reports, okay, these guys might visit, but it's also very early in a lot of these conversations. The portal's only been open for 3 days.
Yeah, part of my thing is like somebody goes in the portal, if there's even some tenuous connection to Virginia, it's like this guy would make a lot of sense. It's like a lot of guys would make a lot of sense. I mean, they're going to get offers from everywhere though. Like, Sherrod Koval was a Virginia guy who went to Clemson and didn't quite work out with Clemson. So that might be one of those coming home type deals. What was the guy, the Marshall running back, AJ Turner?
He's from Hampton.
He would make a lot of sense as a coming home guy. But again, I don't know what kind of offers these guys are getting out there. So at this point, I don't really know how serious the interest is. Even when they come and visit, it's like, well, they're going to make a couple other visits as well. So I generally hold off commenting about who could be coming in until you start seeing some of the commitments roll in, or they get a little bit more serious and get down to their final 2 or 3, because otherwise you're just, flailing in the dark at like whoever's in the portal, like this guy would be great. It's like, yeah, he would be great, but there's 130 teams out there that could potentially be getting them too.
The only thing I will add about the staff changes point is if potentially maybe again that happens down the road, does that change Virginia Tech's ability to pull some of these guys back in from the portal? Does it? Safety room, offensive line. Does that change anything in your eyes?
Maybe. I don't know. There's something about going into the portal that it kind of feels final. How many guys have come back? Early on, Hendon Hooker, Deshaun McLeese both went in and both came out. That was the first year of the portal.
Yeah.
That's before people really had an idea of how this whole thing works. And obviously, Hendon Hooker ended up going back in the next year and thrived at Tennessee. So good for him making that decision. But typically, when a guy goes in, they don't really come back on that whole thing. So I don't know the science of going into this portal, if it's going to just shoot you out the other side to whatever school you're at. But it seems like it's a hard sell to get back. I mean, maybe some coaching changes could change the narrative there, or change the equation on the guy's thinking. But I don't know. There seems to be some finality about going in, and tough to get guys back.
Carter, to the question, I think it would be interesting to see if like if there are maybe coaching changes in the works, does that put a hold on interested guys in the transfer portal, guys that are interested in the portal coming to Virginia Tech?
Great point.
In terms of visiting, in terms of, that could be. I don't know, unless you make big changes. I don't know. You're not really going to get a new car smell of sorts. I mean, it's kind of just going to be the same old, like, hey, we changed one or two position coaches, I guess, but that's about it, right? I don't know. Maybe that changes the way you recruit at those specific positions, depending on where those guys come from, where their ties are. But again, that's all hypothetical.
Right.
And I think the interesting part is it's so early, and it's like people want to know, okay, well, who are going to be the next players? Virginia Tech's going to get players from somewhere. That's the bottom line. You got a bunch of roster spots to fill, especially now that the scholarship limit's been raised. So there are a lot of open opportunities now at Virginia Tech. I'm very curious to see who the Hokies target, because sure, there are a bunch of guys they're interested in, but I think we are, 3 days into the process, and it's very early to just kind of get a general sense of who all might have a realistic shot of coming to Virginia Tech, considering, they're probably dealing with like 20, 30 offers right now from big-time schools.
This is why this week is so brutal if you're a fan of the program, of any program. It's because all you're hearing is guys leaving. Because nobody's signed up to go somewhere unless they had it in mind where they wanted to go, and some team illegally tampered with them to try to get them there and have it all set up. It's not like you're like, well, I'm going in the portal, and then you immediately announce where you're going right after that. On Monday and Tuesday, it's just one after another of guys are leaving the program, and every year it's a sky is falling type thing. And there are some that make sense in this thing. There are some that are concerning, I think. I don't think it's a sky is falling type situation, but it is concerning, some of the losses that they've had. So I would say, temper the feeling about, oh my gosh, everybody's leaving the program, because that happens quite a bit. But just the way that the cycle is set up, you're going to get a trove of bad news early in this week, and then it's going to trickle out the better news that you're going to get with guys coming in later over this month.
Yeah, that's what I was going to leave it with. I think our lasting messages can be that remember, about a week or two from now, I always think back to I remember being at home when all these commitments come through. We got our APRs, our 2-ins. Last year it was Peebles, and so that's on the horizon, no doubt. I think
the other part is we just went through signing day last week, and everybody's out, oh, this guy's gonna be a star, this guy's gonna be a star. Just keep in mind, more than half of those guys are gonna transfer out of here. By the time they're done. I mean, it used to be like a third would be players, a third would sort of be backups, a third would sort of fizzle out and end up somewhere else, or not finish up here. Now the transfer portal is probably 60% of that class will probably transfer before they're done here. I don't know what the numbers are, the math is on it. I should probably look at it based on, once the transfer portal went into effect. But realistically, most of those guys are not going to make a big impact here. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're looking at that and get excited about a class, because you can lop it off right in the middle and go, well, these guys aren't going to do much and these guys will. But you never know which ones will. That's the tough part.
For sure. I think that's a great place to leave the transfer portal. Let's talk a little bit about Whit Babcock's sit-down interview with Bill Roth this past week. I think that was something that we all had listened to. Wanted to ask you, Andy, what was the most maybe glaring takeaway from the piece?
That they released it on a Friday afternoon, the prime hour of when people want to get their news. Like, kind of a weird timing with that whole thing. They've never really been about timing with that. When Babcock did his press conference about Justin Fuente a couple years ago, and it did it on the day when his buyout dropped, and then he came in there and announced that they were keeping him. It's like, well, why did you do it on the day that the buyout? Yeah, I'm getting off on a tangent here. It was good to hear Babcock talk. He has not really done any interviews about this thing, has not spoken about the House settlement. He typically does not do interviews during the season about a certain, program or something like that. It's just sort of his policy with it. So coming out and speaking after the season, it was nice to hear his thoughts on that. And I'm sure whatever he said, a ton of Hokies fans were not going to be satisfied. Short of coming in and being like, we're cleaning house, everybody's fired. Like, that's what a bunch of people wanted to hear. He wasn't going to do that. He outlined what his schedule is going to be like with Brent Pry, meeting with him this week, today, I believe. We're recording this on a Wednesday. So sort of their after season meeting to discuss, all aspects of the program top to bottom and sort of a plan going forward. Outline the House settlement, what it means for Virginia Tech. I think the biggest takeaway is that he said that the $20.5 million in revenue sharing the schools will be allowed to do next year, once this House settlement is agreed to, is they have that piece together for the first year. Now they're going to have to figure out a way to make that sustainable over time, but they are ready in the first year to have that full amount ready to go to pay to players. And I think there's a lot of schools that don't have that at this point, or are not planning to fund the full $20.5 million. So that's good news from Virginia Tech's perspective. We'll see how they do that long term. But that's sort of my general takeaways from the whole thing. It was just nice to hear it and hear it. And I thought he did a good job outlining what the House settlement meant and for Virginia Tech specifically, and just sort of the overall mechanisms in it.
David, what did you think?
Yeah, I'm sure there are a bunch of fans listening to that going, I really do not care about this House settlement. All I want is Whit Babcock fired, right? Like, that's the general consensus. If you look on the message boards, if you look on social media, it's, oh my gosh, clean house, blah, blah, blah. I thought Babcock did a really good job of kind of just painting a picture of where Virginia Tech stands in the general NCAA realm of how the House settlement impacts the program. Andy kind of wrote a brief article about some of the biggest takeaways from it, and Babcock's like, we are dang sure not a 500 program. I'm very interested to hear what what Whit and Pry's conversations were like.
Said I believe in him with Brent Pry.
He did say
said
that.
I believe in him. So that was a big takeaway.
But I think the biggest thing in my opinion, just outlining how Whit went and outlined, hey, this is what the House settlement means, and this is how it's going to impact Virginia Tech. And Virginia Tech is positioned to have success or to have the opportunity to have success in this new revenue sharing era, right? Like Andy said, I don't know how many other schools around the country already have that money, like they already know what it's going to look like, because Virginia Tech is going to share $20.5 million annually with student athletes. And a lot of schools, I think, don't know where that's coming from. And Roanoke Times wrote a story about it a couple weeks ago. I think when Whit talking about piecing it together about how the athletic department, the university increased the athletic department's budget by like 1% to like 6%. And combined with some of the, like, in my opinion, combined with some of the leftover surplus Tech had, right? That's where some of that money's coming from. But the fact that Tech already has it, like, Tech kind of has, I don't want to say a leg up, but you get where I'm coming from, right?
Sure.
Tech is well positioned. I did think some of his other stuff he was talking about, like he mentioned Kelly Woolwine potentially being a general manager for Virginia Tech. And
I think it's more of he's functioning as a GM in his role in Triumph, because so much is negotiations and dollar amounts. I don't think it's any sort of official position, sort of a de facto thing, just with how it's working right now. But it sounds like they're going to build out their player personnel department. The way he described it, almost sort of NFL-like. Yes. And how they want to develop that, and in terms of figuring out payroll, essentially. I know they don't want to call it payroll, but that's what it is. Figuring out, where that money needs to be best spent. He mentioned a Moneyball aspect to it. You've got to figure out the positions that need to be paid. You have to allocate it correctly and build out an entire roster, not have it unbalanced in certain ways. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
And he mentioned two Virginia Tech alums that work in pro sports that kind of deal with that stuff. Jeff King, who I believe is
Eric
a senior,
Neander too.
Senior player of senior director of player personnel for the Chicago Bears, and Eric Neander, who's the senior director of baseball operations for the Tampa Bay Rays. So, Hokies have some alums in some positions, I think, that they hope can help them go forward. He did mention the Moneyball thing, which I thought was interesting, but very, very interested to see how Virginia Tech kind of attacks this new era. but it seems like the Hokies are well positioned from the athletic department top, if that makes sense.
I think the overarching thing in the interview, and it wasn't going to get too detailed on what's going to happen with the football program because he hadn't talked to Pry at that point. They'd done it before that. But the message was, we hear you. You know, they said that a couple times. You know, they apologized to the fans for the season they had. You know, said that they deserve to have more rewards on the end of this thing and some actual wins coming from this whole thing. I think it's just acknowledging that, you know, there's a frustration out there from Hokies fans, and there's frustration from the administration about, you know, where this thing is, and it's not there yet. They had a disappointing season. You know, that's part of the athletic director's jobs to go out there and sort of soothe some nerves, some frayed nerves out there from the fans about the direction of the program. So I don't know if anything he could say necessarily is going to be satisfying on that front. They want to hear answers. You know, what are you going to do? Well, they hadn't had the meeting yet, so you can't outline what exactly you're going to do. But at least going out there and acknowledging, you know, this season was not great. It was not what they wanted it to be. I think that was, you know, something that they should do more often, at least, is going out there and speaking directly to fans and, you know, and address some of the things that they're hearing.
Whit doesn't usually speak. I mean, that's just not something he does. I want to say the last time we talked to him was about the Metallica thing.
And before that was probably
briefly.
And that was very briefly.
He just made a statement and then turned it over to Brad Worthman, essentially.
And before that, I mean, might have been the Megan Duffy introductory press conference. So it's been a while. Honestly, Andy, I want to say it was when we were going out to Stanford. You remember that mailbag question you got about Whit?
Yeah, it was a good one. That's why I published like the whole thing. It was like 6 paragraphs.
Yeah,
it was like, where's he been? You want to hear him be the face of Virginia Tech athletics. And I think I hear from a lot of other athletic directors a lot more. Not always positively. Bubba Cunningham seems to be knee deep in it all the time at UNC. But you know, I feel like I hear from the Alabama AD made a ridiculous statement after they got left out of the playoff. Yeah. But at least he made the statement. Like, that is something that the Alabama fans want to hear. Yeah. Like, what are you going to do about it? It's like his explanation was asinine. Well, we'll just stop scheduling tough teams in the non-conference. It's like, okay, you're going to play Mercer twice? Like, what are you going to do with this whole thing? But at least it was a response, and that's playing to your base, and that it's like, all right, he's fighting for us in this situation. If you don't put that message out there, and yeah, I've mentioned this, you know, Twitter's not everything, but you know, Whit hasn't tweeted since
late 2022.
It's 2 years. Yeah. I mean, it's been 2 years. How are you going to get messaging across to your fans if you don't at least, you know, go in that forum every now and then? So I thought this was a nice thing. I would have liked it. You know, it was a friendly situation there on home turf with Bill Roth doing the interview. He's an employee of Virginia Tech. So you're going to get a certain polished questions to that whole thing. It'd be nice if he, you know, spoke in front of the actual media. It'd be nice just, hey, come talk to me. I'm available all the time. You don't even have to have Mark Berman coming in there chomping on your ankles the whole time doing that whole thing. But, you know, the opportunities in front of, a non-biased media that's going to ask you some tough questions and stuff, I think they should do that every now and then.
Very nice. Do we feel like we've put a bow on?
Sure.
Totally up to you guys. All right. Sounds good. As always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. First Bank and Trust Company offers a variety of checkings and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs. That includes free checking. So visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Let's end on a high note, guys. We're going bowling, okay? Despite the disappointment of the season, we got a nice bowl game down in Charlotte. The Duke's Mayo Bowl. The opponent is Minnesota. Friday, January 3rd, 7:30 p.m. from Bank of America Stadium, the home of the Carolina Panthers. Minnesota finished 7-5 on the year, 5-4 in Big Ten play. Their best win probably against USC, I would say. They finished the season with a win over, the Wisconsin Badgers.
I didn't even watch it. I went to Wicked instead.
Good choice.
I was just like, they're going to lose this game. It's so bad.
Good choice. And it should be a Hokie party down in the Queen City. So I think everybody, as far as Hokie Nation feels, everybody wins there.
This was the best they could have done bowl-wise, best outcome. Because, if the ACC only gets one in the playoff, that bumps everybody down. I think Duke, probably a pretty good candidate to go to that Duke's Mayo Bowl. They would have had to been taken ahead of Virginia Tech in the pecking order with 2 more wins than the Hokies had. So that would relegate them to the Fenway Bowl. You're playing up in a baseball stadium and cold. Like it's a bad setup. I don't like those bowl games in baseball stadiums like that, especially in the northern cities. If you're going to do it, at least you have warm weather. But this one's good. They've been there a couple times. This is their 3rd time since 2016 playing, and they had that memorable, comeback against Arkansas in 2016. The 2019 game was a great game in terms of drama. I mean, the pregame fight.
That was memorable.
Fisticuffs before the game that rose to the level of fisticuffs, I think, on our level of fights. But that was a great game. But Foster's last one, they couldn't hold on there at the end. But thrilling finish. Regardless if you're just looking at it from a neutral eye. So I think going back there and playing in this game against a Minnesota team that, a decent team, has its own, weaknesses, really strong defense, top 10 defense, really, bad offense. I think 112 nationally on offense. It'll be an interesting matchup, seeing them play the Gophers.
And it's late too. January 3rd. I mean,
we get past Christmas, past New Year's.
That's so weird.
It is very weird.
It is the second latest non-playoff game. The Bahamas Bowl's on the 4th. It's out of that. Like once you get past New Year's Day, like I feel like the bowl game should be serious at that point. Like you're playing serious games. Only the best teams are still playing, and now you got 7-5 against 6-6 with Lord knows how many opt-outs. I mean, if it's that late in the season, and you're already sort of encroaching on, preparation for the NFL draft. It's one thing if you play a bowl game on like December 28th, you're done. You're like, all right, I have the rest of December and early January to kind of get my feet under me. But if you're an NFL potential guy and it's January 3rd and you're still going to practice and prepping for the game, I feel like that might lead to a few more opt-outs in this whole thing. I mean, I can't imagine Bashal Tutin's going to play in this game. I just don't think he will. I'm not saying I've heard that anywhere. He sort of said he's in New Jersey. He said something on his like a
Instagram story,
Snapchat or something like that.
Maybe,
that like
he's not in town.
So I would imagine a guy who's had an injury history this year, who plays a position that gets beat up like that, would look at that and go, I don't really need to do it. And honestly, he doesn't need to prove himself anymore anyway. I think he is what he is as an NFL draft prospect, and no reason to risk that anymore. DeQuan Felton put a thing on Instagram last night declaring for the NFL, which he's out of eligibility, so he's going to go to the NFL anyway, or try to. Look at that maybe more as like a way of saying, I'm out of here right now. Like he ended it with 9 out. That might just be a sign that says, hey, I'm not playing in the bowl game, even though he didn't explicitly say that. For guys in the future that are putting this out, say specifically whether you're going to play in the bowl game, just so I don't have to read between the lines on this whole thing. But I would imagine January 3rd, like that's just, man, you're getting into January. It's a brand new year. It's like you want to turn the page and move on. Do you really want to go through, what's going to be 3+ more weeks of practices? Like it's one thing if you have like a week more of practice, then you play the bowl game and you're done. Like 3 more weeks of practices, I think I could look at that and go, maybe I could skip that.
Yeah, you're getting pretty late. That's and at that point, I guess I will say, like, I think it's at least convenient for me. I don't know if Andy would agree, but
it's great for me. I can make my end of year poker game now.
There you go.
That was gonna be at risk if the Gasparilla Bowl was on the table.
Last couple of years, it's like you play a game right around Christmas or a couple of days after, and it kind of messes with Christmas a little bit, and you get to spend a lot of time with your family. This year now, kind of uninterrupted a little bit, but it is very, very weird, very late. But I do think it's kind of an interesting matchup that is prior to the opt-outs. And I don't know what Minnesota's side will look like. Again, a really good defense. Right now you're looking at a Virginia Tech team that might have, one of the 2 quarterbacks, Benji Gosnell, and 1 returning offensive lineman. It's going to be kind of a makeshift team, and I think this is kind of what you're seeing. It started kind of with the Pinstripe Bowl a couple of years ago. You're seeing bowl games kind of turn into this, where yes, they are rewards, but a lot, because of the transfer portal opens before, a lot of these guys are saying, okay, I'm getting in the portal and leaving. Virginia Tech, a lot of these guys are starters or guys that are playing big minutes. So it's certainly interesting because, I mean, at this point, like this could be about like the Pinstripe Bowl roster in terms of guys coming back.
Yeah, I think you get a little more offensive punch because there's younger guys in the program.
Yeah.
That, Pop Watson and these young receivers just to go out there and play.
Should be better at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean that's a better. What was the Pinstripe?
yeah.
It was Connor Blumreck, and what was their leading receiver? It was like Luke Bussell or something like that. I mean, it was not.
And Payu had
Jaden
catch.
Payu, heck of a catch.
It was the only catch of his career. I mean, it was a thin group, and there wasn't like a lot of promising guys behind it. I think that's a little bit different this year.
Yeah.
One thing about the Gophers, and when I say Gophers, you can really hear my Minnesota accent come out. I've figured out over the years that really lengthened the O there. They have a 7-game winning streak in bowl games. Going back to 2015, started with Tracy Clays as the interim coach for Jerry Kill. That year, but PJ Fleck has won 5 straight bowl games, so something to keep in mind. I think the line's 4.5 right now, and I can only imagine that gets bigger as you see some of the opt-outs here for Virginia Tech.
And the Dylan Whitkey Bowl.
That's right.
Whitkey.
He did transfer.
Yes, we were all
Minnesota.
thinking about that.
In Minnesota, yes, absolutely. I love it though. Charlotte, great city, a lot of Hokies down there. I am concerned what they're going to have, but to Andy's point, glimpse of the future offensively. Hopefully Pop has some, or Kyron has some protection. Hopefully so, but it should be a fun time. And I think the fact that it's against a Power 4 team adds a little bit of luster. I think it's hard to get up for a game against, I get it, Tulane or Memphis or whoever it may be. Power 4 game gives you an opportunity, win an out-of-conference Power 4 matchup now. Maybe Tech can do it, but there is maybe a little bit. What's that? Snap the streak.
I'm not rooting for anybody to get injured or anything like that. How many opt-outs or do you have to get Dylan Whitkey versus Pop Watson as the quarterbacks in that game?
I love it.
That'd be fun to watch.
That would be crazy. Right?
Yeah, I think first of all, Charlotte's great, and God, it feels like we're in Charlotte all the time now. I mean, as far as
easy
like
to get to.
as far as like convenient
I'm okay
for
with
us.
that.
I mean, Andy and we flew out of Charlotte twice this year for other things, and I was there we were there for preseason football media day. I was there with Carter for preseason basketball media day. I was there for the Ally tip
Women's hoops. Yeah.
So it's like
ACC tournament in March.
yeah, oh God, well,
Maybe.
we'll see.
The question is, will there be a fight at the NASCAR track again?
Oh.
Which seems to happen every time that they're there. When they do
That's
that
where it
thing.
happened in 2019, right?
I think it happened in 2016 too. It wasn't as publicized in 2016, but apparently, like they always set it up this way that they go to the NASCAR track. It's a cool thing. You get to ride around the track in the car and get to go like 180 miles per hour or something like that. So that's fun. But they always do it where one team is leaving and the other team is arriving, and inevitably there's a little spat out there. It doesn't rise to the level of fisticuffs, if we're going to go back to my level of fights on the thing. But it's pushing a fracas.
How did you come up with this, by the way? I saw your list on Twitter.
I consulted with the oracle on this, Aaron McFarland, because I feel like all those names are in his wheelhouse, or all those words. So that's how we did it. I don't have the list right in front of me right now, but I feel like we crafted a pretty good list with some good reasoning behind it. So whenever a melee breaks out, that was the top level, by the way. I'll address it on my perfect 10-point scale. I'll say what it got up to.
One last thing I was going to say, Gio, is what Carter touched on. Like, this is an opportunity, I think, to see a lot of the young guys, right? You're going to see a Chance Wiggins. You're going to see a Keelan Adams. You're going to see a Dante Lovett. You're going to see a lot of these really exciting young guys get to play a lot of minutes, a lot of snaps. And I think as a Virginia Tech fan, that's what you should be looking forward to. You should be looking forward to seeing, whether it's Pop Watson or Kyron Jones, looking forward to seeing a pretty good quarterback out there for Virginia Tech. You get to see some of these young running backs. To Andy's point, this is not like the Pinstripe Bowl where Virginia Tech was just like down to the bone. Like, there is depth. It's just unproven and young. There's talent. So I'm kind of interested to see who jumps out. You know, what kind of guys step up and have a breakout game in the bowl game, because that's something that, you know, could potentially lift them, power them, you know, through the offseason to next year. And that's kind of, say a guy goes off and has a big game, a couple big catches and whatnot. You're sitting here going, man, that's a guy to watch out for next year. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I completely agree with you. I think I'm looking forward to seeing another NFL press box. We've seen, we've seen Miami, we've seen Pittsburgh.
Oh, it's nice.
So I'm
they have like a
looking forward to
popcorn
this.
machine in there and like an ice cream machine in there.
You got to imagine at a bowl
You're
game
speaking-
too, the media meal's got to be pretty good.
It is, if I remember it correctly. It's just spacious.
You're speaking Carter's love language.
You go in there and like the space on press row is nice, and then there's this huge area behind it where you can just kind of like lounge. So
Nice.
I feel like you lose that in a lot of college press boxes. A lot of them are nice, but you're sort of packed in there. This one is just huge.
Do we know where it's televised? I could not find that. Or not
Yes.
ESPN.
The broadcast
7:30
crew was
p.m.
just
Eastern.
released.
Oh, wow.
Matt Berry, Dan Mullen, and Harry Lyles Jr.
That's the Thursday night crew.
yeah.
Gotcha.
That's a Friday.
Future
Yeah.
Virginia Tech offensive coordinator Dan Mullen is going to be on this call. Is that what they're saying?
That's insane. Let's end on a fun note here. What'd you guys think of how the college football playoff has shaken out? I would just like to say you can thank the Syracuse Orange for a lot of the chaos with Clemson getting in and all of that.
I think it's great. I'm going to watch the hell out of this thing.
Oh,
This is
yeah.
going to be so awesome. Like complaints, this team didn't get in, stuff like that. Like leave it somewhere else. I don't want to hear it. They did the right thing putting SMU in over Alabama. If this is a year that Alabama doesn't make the playoff, when are they ever going to miss the playoff? This team lost, but to the worst Oklahoma team this century by 21 points a couple weeks ago, coming off a game against Mercer. Like, it's not like there was a body blow game in the previous one. They were just like, oh my gosh, they were just worn down by this whole thing. Like, they had 2 weeks basically to prepare for this thing. They scored 3 points and lost by 21. It's not a travesty that Alabama is not in the playoff here. So, I love the fact that SMU is in this thing. I like 2 ACC teams. Like, people are going to complain about the seeding with Boise State being 3, Arizona State 4. That's not going to last. They're going to change this before next year. I guarantee it. But remember, they set this up with 5 power conferences in mind. And then, Pac-12 gets torn apart, and all of a sudden that's one, auto bid that's off the table. Essentially, it goes to the top 5 conference champions. But this whole thing was designed for a different setup in the FBS model, and it's going to need some tweaking. But man, these matches, we see Ohio State and Tennessee in the first round. Notre Dame, Indiana is fascinating.
In-state,
the battle
yeah.
for Indiana, like Notre Dame's never playing Indiana otherwise. I kind of love this underdog SMU going up to Penn State, and whoever wins that plays against Boise State in the next round. Like, I think you look at that, you go, Penn State kind of got a break with the seeding, but sometimes that works like that. Texas, Clemson, I think I know which side I'm leaning on is going to win that game, but you never know. And then they get to the next round and playing, one of the hottest teams in the country right now, Arizona State. I think this could be fun. This is going to be fun to watch.
Oh, yeah.
I'm excited already.
I'm locked in.
It's going to be great. Yes. Thank you to Syracuse for giving us a great ACC championship game.
Fran
that
Brown.
was
Fran Brown.
terrific. Clemson and SMU.
awesome.
Kevin Jennings, he's so fun to watch. And then Nolan Hauser, I think, is the
Yep,
the
Clemson
kicker.
kicker. 56-yarder for the win.
McDonough's call was chef's kiss.
That was great. And I believe David Teal included it in the story he wrote about the bowl selection stuff from Charlotte. The part about what it means now in terms of the ACC's success revenue, whatnot, right? That kick essentially was like worth like $4.6 million or something like that.
Yeah, I forget exactly what the
19,
payout is,
20-year-old.
but SMU and Clemson, because they qualified for this, get a larger share of the pie. So it's a big deal for these schools to go into it, as if SMU needs more money. They're not getting anything from the ACC to begin with. They're basically just funding this with oil futures from all the people down there in Texas. So they've got money to spare down there. But I think it's a nice breakdown for the whole thing, and who knows how this thing's going to play out? I think that's the beauty of it is, you hear all these SEC homers that talk about, oh, the SEC would beat this team by this much and beat this team by this much. And then when they get on the field, you don't always see that play out. I think that's going to be the interesting part is how will this play out? It's sort of on any given Sunday, on any given Saturday type of deal, a team could rise up and beat another one. I saw somebody tweet that the SEC is unbeaten in hypothetical matchups. Well, that's true. They're always a 20-point favorite in these games. Georgia was a huge favorite against Georgia Tech. And what happened? It goes to 8 overtimes. So it doesn't always play out how you think it's going to play out. So that's why I think this is going to be fun. We're actually going to see it decided on the field. And if it gets to Georgia and Oregon in the championship game, and it might not because Georgia has an injured quarterback all of a sudden, they're in their backup guy. Like, so what? All these people, oh, this would be the perfect year for the BCS. No, it wouldn't, because it wouldn't be fun to get to that point. Enjoy this tournament. The NCAA men's basketball tournament is such a fun event at the end of every year because it's an unpredictability. You don't know which way it's going to go. So treat this sort of the same way. And even if it gets out to the same result where one plays two in the championship game, it doesn't mean that this whole thing was a failure, because it was the path to get there was a fun trip.
They definitely got it right. Definitely got it right. And Bama, to your point, like they talk about out of conference schedule, they gotta schedule softer or whatever. But again, like, to lose by 3 touchdowns to Oklahoma, to lose to Vanderbilt on the road. And I get it. Like, Vanderbilt beat Virginia Tech, but they still went 6-6. So, like, you're not a playoff team. And if Alabama didn't have the Alabama name brand attached, that's probably not even a conversation. Yeah. SMU, again, to penalize a team for playing in a league title game, losing on a walk-off field goal would have just been the ultimate travesty. And on top of that, like, if that had happened and SMU had been left out, what are the chances that the ACC actually nixes its conference title games going forward?
Yeah.
It's a realistic conversation.
Yeah.
I think with the Alabama thing is like we need to make we're not going to play tough games in the non-conference. It's like, you lost 2 6-6 teams in your own conference. That's why you didn't make the playoff. So I always see this argument: who would you beat? They beat X number of top 25 teams, which is kind of a bogus thing when you choose to rank Duke 26th and Louisville 28th and say those wins don't count. Like, those are so much different than beating, number 20 Missouri or something like that. And then you say, well, what was your record on teams that were over 500? It's like, well, that's sort of a weird cutoff to put when you lost to 2 teams that were 500. So my thought of this is, last year we were choosing between a 1-loss SEC champion and an unbeaten ACC champion. And whoever was going to get left out there, it was going to be an injustice, I think. You win the SEC, the toughest conference, I think you deserve to be in the playoff. You go unbeaten in the ACC, regardless of who your quarterback's going to be, not getting in, that was a real injustice for Florida State. As much as I hate to say it, because they've been such jerks ever since then with how they treated the conference and suing everybody and, you guys be worthless without us and all this stuff.
They went 2-10.
This year we're talking about 12 versus 13. If you didn't get in this year, you had opportunities to get in that you missed. Alabama lost to 2 6-6 teams. South Carolina lost a couple games that it shouldn't have. A blowout against Ole Miss at home. Ole Miss lost to Kentucky at home, I think.
And that's a funny thing. Like, Lane Kiffin's on Twitter saying, like, oh my God, our team needs to be in. And it's like, somebody was like, Lane, you lost to Kentucky, who was 1-7 in the SEC.
Yeah. Like, if you didn't get in this year, it's because you did something on the field that was a loss that led you to not get in. Last year, Florida State did what it was supposed to. It won every game on the schedule and did get in. That's an injustice. This is just teams whining about not being the 13th seed or the 11th seed in a playoff that probably isn't winning the national title anyway. Spare me. Go to the Capital One Bowl and collect your check, and I don't want to hear about it.
And again, it's all the SEC. All the SEC. Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina wasn't doing as much complaining. They didn't have as much of a case. I actually would have loved to have seen South Carolina in there because I think they can make some noise, but they weren't.
They're hot, but I mean, you lost LSU, you lost Alabama,
Hokies
you lost Ole Miss.
Atlanta.
Yeah,
you can't lose head-to-head to the teams you're being directly compared with and then complain about not getting in. Much as I like Shane's team, and I think they did a great job this year, and I wouldn't want to play them right now, but you got to win those games to get there.
We have to go have a party down in Atlanta to open the season next year because
a party.
Yeah, we do because first of all, birthday weekend 22. We don't celebrate that as heavily, but so
you're gonna have a birthday every one of these like massive openers every year. It's great.
It is great. You got South Carolina, Virginia Tech, I believe Saturday night. Do you guys know who plays the night before in the same building?
I'm going to guess Syracuse if you have that smile on your face.
That'd be the Syracuse Football Orange and the Tennessee Volunteers. How could you not
that's
go
a
to
hideous
Atlanta?
Uniform matchup.
Orange on orange?
It's like two different shades of orange.
Blue.
Syracuse will wear, well, no,
It's
they'll
still
probably
gonna
be
be
away
hideous.
team.
It's still going to be a hideous matchup, uniform-wise.
Sure.
It's just,
it might not be great on
just
the
like
field
Virginia
either.
Tech versus the Minnesota. That's not going to be a good uniform matchup coming out. Two shades of maroon on the same.
But Penn State, Oregon was pretty nice.
And by the way, Penn State's second whiteout game for the SMU game. They're doing a second whiteout, which is going to be sick.
As they should. Night game? Is it a night
Different
game?
shades of orange is always the
Yes.
worst one. Clemson, Texas, that's going to be a bad one.
That's going to be rough.
Is there a playoff game you're most looking forward to?
Playoff game I'm most looking forward to. You know, so a little bit of backstory. I have family in Scottsdale, which is near Tempe, and Arizona State was a school that I thought about going to. It was like between Syracuse Tech and Arizona State. So I've always kind of rooted for ASU. I have some ASU apparel because of my family there. I've been to an ASU football game out there. So I'm rooting for the Sun Devils and Cam Scadaboo and Kenny Dillingham.
Playing good defense.
Ohio State, Tennessee is going to be. I mean,
That's going to be
You
amazing.
can't think of bigger programs going up against one another, and they're both complaining about their seating and how they should have been higher, probably. So whoever loses that, their fan base is going to be miserable, which is the fun part about college sports, is watching people be miserable about their team. But the two that are really fascinating to me, because I love an underdog story, and these are the two underdogs in the thing that people are like, oh, they shouldn't have been in it. Indiana against Notre Dame. I mean, that's little guy against this behemoth in college football, and SMU against Penn State. And, this team that, Florida State saying shouldn't even be in the ACC, going up against Penn State that, honestly, James Franklin beats who he's supposed to beat and then doesn't beat anybody that's ranked higher than him. This will be a really interesting one. And they get the home game, these home crowds. I think it's gonna be fun to watch an underdog try to go into this road environment and try to pull out a victory.
And the coolest thing was like looking at some of the, like I saw somebody tweet out some of the ticket prices and stuff. It's like all these venues are going to be sold out.
Yeah.
Like it's going to be peak college football environment. Like that's exactly what you want for a college football playoff. The next thing I think is, it'd be great if they could play the semifinal or the quarterfinal round at campus sites too. That'd be great.
I agree with you, David, except for the fact that, did you hear what Kirk Herbstreit said about Ohio State?
I did think that was interesting.
They're going to be I really think they're going to be, because
I missed that. What did he say?
I'm a little
He said it might have been better for them to play on the road, considering all the fans are so mad at Ryan Day, and that if stuff does not go right early, they're going to boo him.
Yeah, that's true.
And being a little, so my girlfriend's brother is a senior at Ohio State. Her family's crazy Buckeye fans. And then my roommate, Raza, who works for us here, big Buckeyes fan. So I've spent a lot of time around this fan base, and they are an interesting bunch where they hate Ryan Day, but like love the Buckeyes all at the same time. And I can totally see that being a scenario where if they're punting on the first two drives, that's the situation they face. And tickets to that game, cheapest playoff ticket you can get is Tennessee, Ohio State. You can get tickets for like $250, and all these other places like Penn State, the cheapest ticket is like $1,000 or something. And I think that says a little something as far as to how upset the fan base is at what's going on.
That sounds like a good thing to say. Like Herbstreit is always kind of clever. You'd rather be on the road. It's pure insanity. You want the home game in front of 110,000 of your own fans, regardless of whether they're satisfied with how things are going. If you get it going even a little bit, that's going to be such a huge advantage to have that home crowd on your side. It's cute that he's saying that whole thing. You absolutely take the home game. Come on.
I could not imagine that game on Rocky Top. I mean, that'd be crazy. That'd be pretty crazy.
Crazy.
It's going to be good, and it's going to be nice that hopefully Virginia Tech playing on January 3rd. It's not a complete opt-out team.
Sure.
And hopefully by then people still are interested in watching bowl games and stuff. But what is the date for the second round for the quarterfinals of the playoff?
New Year's Eve, maybe?
Is it New Year's Eve?
Yeah, they do those around New Year's Eve.
And so the semifinals are going to be the weekend after, like the 4th, 5th, right after Tech's bowl game.
Don't they take like a 10-day break at some point?
Fiesta Bowl 31st, Peach Bowl on the 1st, the other three on New Year's Day. So,
okay.
Yeah. New Year's Eve, New Year's Day after the first round here.
Yep. Real fast before we let everybody go, who's your national champion and who's your Heisman winner? We'll start with Carter.
Oh, I'm actually curious to hear David and Andy because they actually voted on the Heisman.
We can't tell you.
We are not.
We're
not allowed to say.
I forgot.
I'm sorry to put you guys in that spot.
I will say the three people I voted for, 1, 2, 3, are all finalists.
Okay.
Same here.
Okay.
Same here.
I don't think that's too surprising.
The three guys,
given the top two are probably pretty locked in.
yeah, the three guys I voted for were on the ballot.
Well,
Interesting. So no
I
love for
can
Cam
say because
Scadaboo.
I thought about it.
Okay.
I didn't have a vote. I would vote for Travis Hunter.
Okay.
I thought, I mean, Scadaboo, man, he's such an interesting story because he's a former like Sacramento State running back. I mean, he has lifted that Arizona State team to the college football play. I mean, they are playing their best football right now. This is a tangent, but did you see what Kenny Dillingham tweeted the other day? It was like one of his players entered the transfer portal, and he like quoted the tweet and was like, "Oh my, whoever gets this guy, he's getting an amazing player." Blah blah blah.
That's awesome.
And it's just like you don't see many coaches just like publicly just being like, "You want this kid on your team."
Yeah.
Like it seems like they've got a really good thing going. I would love to see like an Arizona State, Texas, like where nobody thinks Arizona State has a chance.
And then they pull it off.
I think Oregon will win it all, though.
I think my winner is whoever. I think Ohio State's winning that first game. Whoever wins between Ohio State and Oregon, that rematch.
Yeah.
I think they're coming out of the top there.
I agree.
Especially with the quarterback questions with Georgia.
That's the setback
Maybe
there.
Notre Dame might be one to watch. They've been really good. Everybody's like, "Oh, you lost at Northern Illinois at home." It's like, well, have you seen what
You
they've
learned
done?
that the hard way this year.
Yeah.
You kept betting against Notre Dame.
Yeah, have you seen what they've done since then? I kept picking against them. I wasn't betting against them because I was wise enough to understand that my picks were garbage this year. So I stopped putting money behind them.
Yeah, I'd probably have to go Oregon. I mean, I think
Notre Dame, Oregon. That's my championship game.
Yeah, I think Dylan Gabriel might be the difference there. I mean, he's probably the best quarterback in college football right now, and he's playing very, very well. And in a tight game like that, I think he's probably the difference.
I love Dan Lanning, so I'm gonna go Oregon for my pick. But I think
Chalk.
Yeah.
We're all picking chalk.
Yeah.
It's like when everybody picks the number one seed in the NCAA
Notre
tournament.
Dame's a 7 getting to the championship game. So
I
that's
like
a little
that.
bit
I like that.
make a little run. I like their path.
To me, Notre Dame is like you guys thought Miami football, which you guys were right in retrospect somewhat coming into the year. It's like where they're always gonna disappoint. When does Notre Dame ever, punch the ticket? They've gone to a couple national championships. Don't get me wrong, but it
Boise
feels like it's
State
been
can
a
do
long
anything?
time.
I don't know, but I'm going to be fascinated to watch. Like, this is the beauty of it.
A Boise State SMU game would be peak college football.
They have the access. It's going to be on a neutral field. Like, may the best team win in this whole thing. I think it's going to be fun to watch this whole thing. I'm going to watch every single game of this. It's not going to be one that I'm going to miss.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, I think that wraps things up for today. Before we let everyone go, what editorial stuff you guys got coming up?
There's Virginia Tech men's basketball game tomorrow, doubleheader on Sunday. Besides that, I mean, pretty quiet now for basketball because we're approaching Christmas. It's mostly just football portal stuff. I believe Pry is tentatively speaking to the media at some point this week.
Yeah, we'll see. I've heard something about that, but until I see an email or confirmation that we're talking to him, I'm not going to get my hopes up.
Yeah, besides that, is just monitoring the portal, and I think Chris is planning on doing one-ish portal update a week. He wrote his the other day. I thought it was very good, very concise but detailed. Just kind of going over kind of what we talked about of all of these different guys, kind of what we're hearing behind some of them, and who Virginia Tech is targeting in some cases, and that's kind of what we're up to right now, just the portal, and at some point we'll maybe talk about the bowl game. So
Awesome.
The bowl game is so far away. Like if it was on the if we were in like the Gasparilla Bowl, I mean, it'd be in 9 days or something like that, and now it's like, oh, we don't have to think about that until after the New Year.
And Andy can go to his poker game and all as well. So
I'm not going to win, but at least I get to show up.
I heard that they're like seated, like players are seated in the poker game.
Yeah.
What
if
is
you
your-
win
what is
during
your
the regular
seed?
season? I'm at the bottom. I haven't won. I only got in based on points.
Okay.
It's a thing called the golden ticket. So I haven't. So who knows? Maybe
Best of
I'll be
luck.
Charlie in the chocolate factory here. Maybe I'll win this thing.
There we go. Carter's got a big presentation today in our leadership class.
I do. You went on Monday, so
I already got
at 4
that
o'clock today.
taken care of. Shout out to Rex, our professor in that
Yes.
class, because he watches every TSL podcast and he'll talk to us about it too. So shout out Rex. Thanks for listening, and give Carter a good grade today. For Nick Brown, for Carter Hill, for Andy Bitter, for David Cunningham, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long. We'll talk to you next time.